Hello, everybody. I'm back for another stream. I'm kind of tempted to call this more the second breakfast post Scott Sip. And I'm going to keep this going. I'm committed to doing it pretty much every day. I'll have different topics. The live stream, I've noticed, I'm streaming live on Rumble, X, YouTube, and Locals all at the same time. Definitely love to see you guys join me here on any of these streams. And over time, I may transform this a little bit into doing it differently. But for the moment, I'm going to continue with just trying to do a consistent stream every day. And so today's episode 7. I don't have the same kind of, I'm doing a little bit of a different preparation today than I've done in the past. And that's primarily because I just want to, first off, I want to get out and do my walk in the morning, have my cup of coffee with my wife, and talk a little bit about where I'm going with this whole thing. And also, just for health reasons, make sure that, I'm doing, I recently semi-retired for the purpose of dealing with my health, making sure that I'm getting out there and doing exercise every day and having a good future potential by making a good choice today. So a number of the streams that I've done in the past here actually all indicated that, there's people do actually seem to appreciate this, and they're taking part in it and want to see what I'm doing, and I'm glad of that. So I just want to be able to keep that up and able to provide some kind of value to whoever may be out there watching. And when Owen talked this morning on the earlier sip, he talked about reciprocity, which is basically being able to say, hey, I'm doing something, casting it out there like a net in the future with the intention of doing something good that, maybe comes back on me somehow in a positive way. So I'm going to continue doing this, like I said, for that reason, and continue with the intention, attempting to build an audience over time. It's a slow process, especially since everything is invisible. I'm invisible to the internet and invisible to the world at the moment. But what I'm doing is I'm taking down the live streams off of YouTube as soon as I'm done. And then I'm going to edit those a little bit and move them over to straight up recordings. So when I did this before, I noticed that when you go look at your channel on YouTube, the videos are invisible. They don't exist. And then on top of that, there's no way to download them. Somebody asked to download the videos. So I decided what I'll do is kill the live stream on YouTube when it's done, maybe even not even stream live to YouTube, and then post my edited version of that video later. So yesterday I had a glitch in the middle, so I'm going to be posting a video to YouTube later today that actually has the glitch cut out, because it was about a 7-minute period of time where something failed. You can see my background today. Yesterday I had a transparent background, and the reason for that, or what I was attempting, was to use the NVIDIA green screen thing that gets rid of your background. And I like the background. I put the silly shelves up there so I could have a background that I didn't have to fart around with. But the idea is that when I did that, something in the NVIDIA application crashed and it killed my stream. And, it could happen today. I don't know. I don't know if that was what crashed it. So I'm doing a little A/B testing. Yesterday, I had the transparency on and it crashed. And then I brought it back up. Transparency still worked, but I had to kill OBS. I had to kill all of the streaming stuff and then restart it. So that said, there's just little technical glitches to get through, and I still have to figure out. I haven't yet set up or been able to set up getting my chat working here in the way that I wanted to. So there's that. And then I also did some prep again today, like I did over the past couple days, with using AI to gather my information, to gather what I'm going to talk about a little bit. today. And, we'll talk a little bit about the reciprocity, but I'm going to talk about it in a different way, related to persuasion, because persuasion is something, like I said, it's not necessarily my sole purpose is to talk about persuasion, other than, being able to identify it so that when it's used, you actually are aware of it and you're not getting taken advantage of. So my perspective on persuasion is recognizing it, understanding it, making sure that you're not getting caught up by it in a way that causes you to not be able to, involuntarily be pulled into something that you don't necessarily want to be part of. In other words, having a political perspective, or being sold by a salesperson when you don't want to be, being caught up in different things like that. So that's my my aspects of persuasion, is to be able to identify persuasion, not so much to partake or to do it. And when I followed Scott, I wanted to learn it in part to do it, because I wanted to be able to connect with my customers and be able to have a good conversation that worked out. So, and it's funny, when you do something for a living that requires persuasion, it's really easy to justify just learning the skills so that you can use it, and it totally makes sense. It's a criteria for success in what you do is to be persuasive. So, but not having that, not having an agenda to go out and persuade people, it's definitely a different thing. You know what I mean? If you're just trying to, like what I'm doing, I'm not trying to persuade you, other than to maybe motivate. That's something that I would hope comes across. My goal is definitely to give you an incentive to do things in your life, and to, if anything, my focus might be good decision making, being able to apply that, especially when you are in a situation in your life where maybe you look back at parts of your life and you can see where your decision making led to bad, and you want to be able to correct and get it back to good. Or if you caught it before you got into a situation where you started making some bad decisions, maybe making good decisions right up front. You know what I mean? So that kind of thing is more of what I would, do. And then also strategies on how to build your skill stack. Those are the things that I would want to do, and what I want to contribute in what I'm doing here in this stream, is being able to make sure that folks actually take advantage of their capabilities to make good decisions, build that capability, and then also build your skill stack so that whatever you choose to do for a living is actually viable and works. So that's the intro. Like I said, I'm not going to do the simultaneous sip like the other folks are doing, because that's Scott's thing. That's what they're doing. But I still will be sipping. And if you want to sip with me, that's totally cool. I'll give you a little warning, but there you go. 1, 2, 3. But the thing about this show, what I'm planning to do with it, I'm still working on the structure. I still want to talk about a variety of things, but I am going to bring a little bit of news into it, right? So something to get me talk about the things that everybody wants to know about in the world. And so one of the things that I can show you here that has been kind of cool is using Grok. And I talked about this the other day. I'm just going to bring this up so we can look at each of these headlines. But, we'll just talk really quickly through these and see if any of this is worth your time to know about, hear about, whatever. Anduril, if you don't know who Anduril is, they're now officially one of the weapons manufacturers in our country, between drones and mostly drones. There's a drone submarine. Apparently the aircraft that flies with the F-47, the brand new super fighter jet that was built that Trump they named after Trump's presidency, the 47, and they have these side by side stealth fighters that are fully autonomous and under the control of the pilot of the first plane. And I just want to call something out here. You know, I mentioned, if you've been on my previous streams, I've mentioned that controlling multiple things at the same time, it requires a lot of capability. You know, I mean, what Scott did, he built a system where he was able to lay everything in place and have everything working right out of the box. And I'm doing the same thing with this whole stream. So, you know, as I said, I've got on my left over here, I've got Rumble Studio, which is what I use to kick the stream off. And I use that because it lets me stream to 4 different platforms at the same time. And then, and thankfully, by the way, I figured out once you pay for it, it gets rid of the logo. And Scott always kept the logo because, of course, he was a shareholder. I don't own Rumble. I used to own Rumble, but I don't own Rumble anymore. So, you know, I don't necessarily feel the need to advertise for them, although I think it's a great product. I will tell you that. So I'm controlling one thing. Then I've got up above here, I've got my OBS Studio. And OBS Studio is intended to bring all of these things together on a screen for you. So you can see me on the left, and then you've got on the right the browser that I have open. And what we're looking at over here is Grok. Okay, I have a subscription to Grok, to X, and that allows me to have access to the Super Grok, which, you know, it's something like $20, $30 a month when you put it all together. And then on top of that, I've got my Rumble stream on the right on another screen so that I can see that I'm actually online and know that it's working and not going away. And then I have my data sources that I want to sit here and talk to you about today, which include being able to talk about the content that's showing up in front of you here in Super Grok. And then I'm going to go over in a second to NotebookLM, which is part of Gemini. And I have, you know, like YouTube Premium, and I also have the YouTube TV, because I do everything streaming. I've got Starlink and things like that so that I can stream everything, and I don't pay for cable. I don't have any fiber optic or anything like that. This is all coming out of the sky for us today. So the Super Grok gives you, if you go to the grok.com. Now, if you go to X and you want to talk through X, that's fine. X lets you have the ability here to go to Super Grok here. But if you notice down at the bottom, they don't have the news articles in this. Now, maybe if I go here, maybe that'll bring it up. I don't know. This is the first time. I just noticed that for the first time. Yeah, so we've got the storm of the century, and it is the storm of this century already. And, you know, some Trump administration developments, notable U.S. stories. But if you go over here to the Grok page, where it's grok.com, and you're logged in with your X account on the Super Grok, and scroll down, you'll have these For You chiclets that allow you to see what's going on. So back to Anduril, and back to this idea of fighter pilot in the cockpit of a supersonic fighter jet, flying who knows how fast, multiple Mach, right? Hundreds to thousands of miles an hour above the atmosphere, or right at the very fringe of the atmosphere, controlling 2 other semi-autonomous drone fighters that can take part in a battle. And if you tuned in yesterday, well, you couldn't see it on YouTube, but if you were on that stream yesterday, I talked a little bit about being able to, oh, shoot. I lost it for a second there. I was talking yesterday about the shoot. I forgot it. That stinks. I've got things in front of me, and I was thinking about the stream that broke it up for me. But Hmm. I'll remember it. I hope. Probably not. It's probably gone. But I was thinking in terms of being the person. Oh, I remember. I do remember. Thank goodness. It was the OODA loop concept. So, when you're trying to skill up in your life, and you are trying to make good decisions, there's two steps, right? There's skill up, which is build the altitude that you can get to with your skill stack, so that the altitude allows you to have the collected energy of your knowledge and your experience high enough that you can do something, you can maneuver in your life. And the OODA loop is a military doctrine, or it's a military method developed by, what's his name? Colonel John Boyd, who's also the person who helped have he helped develop the F-15, the A-10 Warthog, and a couple of other pretty key items that, military systems that were out there. And there's a weird, funny story about Colonel Boyd and my father, because Colonel Boyd was the person out there doing at the Pentagon, funding the high-level projects and directing how things went with the development of fighter planes. My father was a jet engine mechanic who, because of his work ethic and his dyslexia, he made a tragic mistake one day. And it's not tragic, it's funny. He was assigned to a wing of aircraft that he was going to maintain. And it was an old, this is the late 60s, early 70s timeframe, or late 60s. And he was assigned over here to do maintenance on these aircraft. And one of the maintenance elements was to extract a bolt. This is one of those jets back in the day that had the bolts on they bolted the steel panels on, and the bolts were actually sticking out of the airframe. So he every time you tried to do that, one of the two things would happen. You'd either shear off the head of the bolt because it was so torqued into the metal, or it would have to be, it would strip and it wouldn't allow you to put a new bolt in. So he, in his farm boy ingenuity and short-tempered, like, why the heck isn't this working, snapped a few of these things off and said, to heck with that. And he built himself a tool. And he built a tool that basically would fire a little jet of heat around the bolt with a torch, and then a socket that would go down into the middle of that flame. And when it heated up the outside enough, he could actually extract the bolt. So, that's a cool thing. He invented a tool, which, by the way, they used and they patented and used for years. But when he did that, and of course he got no credit for it, he was just this low-level person. He did the entire wing in a week. He pulled out every single bolt, didn't strip them. One of the things that made it such a long and arduous task is you'd strip it, you'd drill it, you'd put a new thread bed in there, and then you'd re-bolt it after you did the maintenance that you had to do. And so he managed to do 6 or 7 planes in 1 week, just right down the line. And one of the guys came out and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I just finished." And the guy's like, "Are you kidding me? That was 6 months of work. You were supposed to leave. That's what we were supposed to be doing for the next 6 months. Now we don't have anything to work." And they were super pissed at him because he completed the work in 1 week that they'd planned over 6 months. And it's just like, are you kidding me? And this is how government contracts work, right? This is literally how they work. And so he, fortunately, he had a commander who saw the cleverness of what he did and said, "Come on over here, Dean. I got something else for you to do." And he brought him over to the YF-111 project. Now, that is a project that Boyd essentially killed in its infancy. Now, there were reasons for that. It was a swing wing design aircraft that, when it went past a certain speed, you lost efficiency because of the swing wing, and you had extra weight on the aircraft. And, if you were going to go supersonic, you'd pull the wings back. So it was more like a delta wing instead of a big wide airframe. And the wide airframe is fantastic for slow speed maneuverability, which is what makes the A-10 Warthog such a beast. It's got a big wide airframe, and, the maneuverability of that thing is just mind blowing. But he was put on this project to work on the landing gear for the YF-111. And after he did all the work, he basically, they put him into making the mock-up for the hydraulic parts inside the YF-111. And he didn't really even know, right? Just picture yourself at 18 and being put on an, top secret, high level engineering project you didn't expect. And here's my dad, no degree, never been an engineer, doesn't have any, he was a farm boy, literally, and it didn't graduate high school, had a GED, and went straight in the Air Force after years in a foster home. It was a very interesting story that he lived through. So when he ended up in this, in the Air Force, and he ended up associated with these projects, he didn't know what was going on. He just did what he was told. He just, okay, fine, I'm working on the YF-111 now. What's YF-111? And so his commander brought him out to test flights, and they were doing test flights with the aircraft. And the way that the yoke was built on this thing, it was super flexible. So the aircraft would land over and over again. They would land it, take off, come around, land it, take off, and they were just slamming the front end of that thing into the pavement because they were testing what it would be like when they landed this thing on an aircraft carrier. And the reason for the swing wing is this was a Navy contract. They wanted to be able to have a smaller footprint, so when the plane went into the hangar of an aircraft carrier, that it would fit. You didn't have to have the gigantic spread of wings. So they were testing like landing with a hook, and the front end, which is the part that and the hydraulics that were part of the landing gear. This thing, the hook hits and it just slams right down and slows it down. So over and over again, he's watching this, and he doesn't even know. He's out in Pennsylvania somewhere, has no idea why he's there. Just literally like oblivious, other than boss told me to be here, so I'm here. So he spent a couple of weeks watching the whole thing happen, never understanding the significance of what he was doing, which was prototype development for an advanced fighter craft. What ended up happening is all of that landing gear ended up being used in the F-14 and some of the other aircraft that were out there, some of the design pieces that they did. And what he did, he went inside the cockpit, and they said, you've got to get these hydraulic connections from point A to point B, and it's got to be in the tightest possible space, and it's got to have room for the, like the wheel of the aircraft to come in without getting snapped off. Because if the wheel comes up and you snap one of the hoses or the pipes for the hydraulics, you can't bring the wheel down, or you could bring it down, but you can't bring it back up again after that. So he had to figure out how to embed that all inside the airframe, inside the wheel well for the aircraft. And that was the piece that he did. And after he physically did it, he hand carved all of the pieces with balsa wood. And then after it was all fitted in, he ended up, this is like CAD without CAD, it's design without CAD. And then some engineer came along and drew it all. And one thing, if you don't know much about how things work in the Navy, officers back in the day in the Navy, when you first become an officer and then you get put onto a ship, the job that they would have, and I found this out by reading the biography of Robert Heinlein. When you actually are assigned to a ship, they give you a notebook, or you start gathering notebooks. You go around to every single part of the ship, and you draw every single fitting in every single room for everything on the ship. And you basically you're architecturally reverse engineering everything on the ship. That is what an officer used to do back in the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Because at any given point, anybody in the officer cadre could, pop his head up on deck, get hit by a bullet, gone. And then somebody has to pick up where he left off and be competent enough to carry things out. And you know how when you watch Star Trek, or if you've ever watched Star Trek, the captain would call down to engineering and say, "What's going on? Damage report." Well, somebody had to figure out what went wrong. And then if you lost somebody, how to get it back, you know? And then Scotty always, "Oh, I got it. It'll be 10 minutes, sir," right? You know, and what is he doing? He's pulling up in his head, if not on paper or in the computer, the drawings for what was broken and how are we going to refit it so that it's working. You know, maybe I have to truncate some pipes so that the hydraulics for the upper lifts are continuing to work, whatever it might be. All of that stuff that you see in Star Trek, and you only see the tiniest slice of it, the way that they, you know, engineer what's the damage report. That's a snapshot into what it was like to be on a battleship or an aircraft carrier back in World War II. And all of that comes from being able to look at having people on your ship who knew the ship intrinsically to the point where they could give you a damage report, say, okay, you know, room XYZ has been blown out on the front quarter of the ship because we were hit with a missile or a gunfire or whatever. And being able to say, we're functional because the hydraulics that went through that room are not affecting the rest of the ship, so you're good to go. That was the kind of thing that you didn't know was happening under the scenes in the scene in Star Trek whenever Kirk asked Scotty, what the heck's going on? So long story short, coming back into the, you know, my father's situation, some officer who understood how to do that reverse engineering drawing took all of his balsa wood pieces and reverse engineered it, and then went out and had a metal fab, CNC metal fab, take all the balsa wood pieces and convert them into actual machined parts that got put into the aircraft. And so it was just, you know, it's just kind of fascinating. And then to find out, like I said, Boyd killed the YF-111 project because he was like, why are we building a swing wing aircraft? This is nuts. We need a cheap aircraft. We need to be able to produce cheap aircraft repeatedly in order to be competitive in the world today. And then come forward a little bit more, you then see 3 specific aircraft, 2 of them, which were following Boyd's perspective, but 3 of them that Boyd really had a huge influence on. The first one was the F-15. So fixed wing, not a F-14 with a big swing wing. We always wondered why did we lose the swing wing that we had on the F-14 to go to a fixed wing? Well, why? Because it's cheaper, lighter, faster, easier to produce, and more maneuverable because the fixed wing actually gives you advantages that the swing wing loses you in combat. So then item 2 was the development of the F-16, and Boyd had a direct impact on that as well. I think some people call Boyd the grandfather of the F-16. So that whole thing leads forward, and then you have the A-10 Warthog. So most aircraft were always on this development path to go from strategic bombers and strategic nuclear payload delivery. That was ultimately the reason the Air Force was created, was after World War II, where we dropped the atomic bombs. They were like, okay, that is our strategic advantage. Now we need to be able to project our strength internationally across the world with atomic weapons in the future. And all aircraft development was primarily focused on how do we get aircraft into a theater where we can drop a bomb, drop a giant nuke or whatever, before they had ICBMs. So all aircraft development was primarily focused on doing that. It was super difficult to do, you know, like the B-52 is a gigantic aircraft that could go from the continental United States all the way over to some other continent and drop a bomb and bug out. But it was huge. And you could, you know, it was a super expensive aircraft to build. And it had a limited payload based on whatever you were trying to bring. There was only so much, you know, it had its strategic advantages and strategic disadvantages. And over time, what people realized is it would be a lot better if we could just get an aircraft carrier to bring the aircraft really close and have a bigger bomb in it and have a shorter range and maybe have a smaller aircraft that we could project in using an aircraft carrier. Wonderful, right? So now we've got, why do we have Navy aircraft being the number one defense contractor project out there. And excuse me for a second. I mentioned, yes, a couple of days ago that I now understand why Scott always had tissues. Because when you're talking, especially on a live stream like this, for some odd reason, I don't know if it's happening to other people, but you get this, and I have a big nose, so you end up with this slightly runny nose that occurs. Now, coming back one step further, once we started to project aircraft throughout the world using aircraft carriers, we wanted smaller aircraft that would fit on an aircraft carrier, but had multiple functions, like the swing wing, so that you could go hypersonic with a swept wing design. And then when you needed maneuverability, you bring it into a full open wing so that you could get that really maximum airframe maneuverability that things like the A-10 Warthog have. But then they spun out and created the Air Force because they realized there's other theaters. There's other, like the Army needs air support. The Air Force, primarily, their mission was project our dominance or our military might into other theaters. But also, if I send troops, I need to give them ground support. I need to give them local air support, things like that. So the Air Force came along, and now we had the design reduction of I don't need a swing wing for a fighter craft because I don't need to store that aircraft on an aircraft carrier. So what can I do to have an aircraft that I can project, especially when they started getting more comfortable with refueling in air? That changed the game. I no longer needed to send an aircraft on an aircraft carrier and then put it into the theater. I could actually just send the aircraft from wherever I was, refuel it along the way, and let it go into the theater. And that still poses problems because, how long can you sit in a cockpit? You might be in that cockpit for 12 hours as a pilot. And, that's why they have these special suits that squeeze your body to help pump in your circulation so that you didn't lose feeling in your legs after 12 hours of sitting. It's crazy. All of the things we do in design to support these things. So then we get to the almost current day with aircraft where the Air Force had a totally different mission. And Boyd in the early to mid 70s, or maybe it was mid to late 70s, said, what we need is not a $1 billion plane. What we need is a $500,000 plane or a $1 million plane or $5 million plane, and I need to be able to mass produce them. So that's where the F-16, the F-15, and the A-10 Warthog come in, and they all had very different purposes. Now, today, when you look at what we're doing, we're not out of that. We're still in that is still an air dominance kind of scenario. But as Scott had pointed out to us, the whole perspective of the war in Russia, the war between Russia and Ukraine, it's all drones. And now you actually have a perfect storm, a perfect situation for a company like Anduril to come along and literally disrupt everything that we've done up to this point. So, this Anduril Long Beach facility expansion, very interesting, no surprise. Anduril's opening that facility in Ohio. Their facility in Long Beach, I used to live right down the street from what they had in there was a facility in Newport Beach, or right on the edge of it in Costa Mesa, maybe. I was vying for a job there once back in the day when I was a proposal writer, and I didn't get it, but that's okay because I didn't really want to be a proposal writer forever. I wanted to do more pre-sales engineering and stuff. So, anyways, the fact that these guys are now in Long Beach, and Long Beach, by the way, is the defense contracts that are in there are pretty amazing. There's a lot of them. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin. That is one of the meccas of U.S. defense. So for them to be announcing a Long Beach facility expansion, really big deal. I know it sounds, I know I just told you this big long story to get back to this, but the whole point of that story was to identify that our aircraft have been shrinking, our budgets have, you know, we think about how much we spend. Imagine if you have to build a $2 billion bomber, right? That's what the B-2 bomber is. It's, I don't know, they call it the B-2. And I don't know if I have the number right, if it's 2 billion is what the cost is, but the B-2 bomber, the $2 billion bomber, how many of those can you build on a budget, you know, on a specific budget? We don't actually have a $1 trillion budget. We have a hundreds of billion dollar budget for the military. You know, building 5 or 10 of those, you probably don't even need that many. I mean, these are super weapons, right? They're the equivalent of a nuclear arsenal all by themselves, the B-2 bombers. So however many of them we have, you know, we may only have a small handful of them, but their projection across the world is massive. So but they're still $2 billion each. You know, if you could make them for 500 million instead of 2 billion, you could build, like, what is that? Two per billion. You could have like 4 for the price of 1 if you could do that. And I'm probably doing the math wrong. I'm sorry. But if you could go with Anduril and you could put a drone up that could fly for a week, and it's all on electric, and it actually, you know, from a refueling perspective, you could just have it drop down on a tiny little ship, and it doesn't have to be a massive aircraft carrier, but a tiny little ship to swap batteries or recharge on the spot in the middle of the ocean. Nobody even knows it's there because it's stealth, and the ship that is out there in the middle of the ocean is also stealth. Or maybe it's a submersible that comes up and charges an aircraft in the middle of the theater, right outside of a theater. I mean, the implications are incredible, and the fact that we can mass produce these means that the price of our military budget goes down. That, of course, means that our taxes could go down because we don't have to spend as much on the military to have just as much projection as we had before. So I find this a very interesting thing that's going on. And going to this next news article, the House passes all 12 appropriation bills after the last one. That's surprising. If you're going to have the opposition, you know, Trump or whoever, basically saying, look, you guys want to shut it down? Shut it down. And so everybody stood on a sideline and watched, you know, half of the Congress bend themselves into pretzels trying to figure out how to get, you know, to blame it on Trump that everything is shut down when it was them who just wouldn't pass the appropriation bill because they wanted a certain thing in it. Now, the thing I wonder about here is when you look at this appropriation bill, is it, look at this, the 12 fiscal appropriation bills mark a significant step in funding the federal government without relying on a large omnibus package. That's what we were asking for in the past, right? That's why we should let the government shut down. It's like, don't tell me I have to allow you to sneak all of these hidden agenda items into the bill under the covers without people knowing what's happening. What I really want is I want you to pass the budget so that we can keep the government open so that government workers continue getting a paycheck, you know? And here's a funny thing. I was on a cruise a little while ago. The week Scott Adams died, I was on a cruise, and it was like the middle of my cruise when, you know, that sucked. I'll be honest, it was a tough day because I really enjoyed watching his shows, and I feel like that was a connection that I had, a daily show that I watched. I didn't always watch it live. I watched it in a recording later. But nonetheless, that whole cruise had some interesting outcomes. We met with some folks that were that we had talked to on a previous cruise, and they were government employees. And what was funny is during the shutdown, they were on a cruise. And what was really interesting is we listened to them explain their strategy. And they said every single time a vote comes up to shut down the government, they plan a cruise or they plan a vacation. Because what they would do is they would take an actual, like, allotted vacation and put it on the books. Then if there was a shutdown, they would cancel the vacation on the books, go on their cruise, because they were going to get paid anyways. So they got a paid vacation without having to take any vacation time, because they would just wait and sit back and go, hey, I don't have to work. And they knew that once the way that the government workers, the contract works, if they get furloughed for that period of time, they're out of work, fine. So they keep enough reserves, they book a vacation, they plan the whole thing ahead. They live on credit if they're going paycheck to paycheck, or they live on their savings if they're smart, which hopefully they were. And they ride out the shutdown. And when the shutdown is over, they get their paycheck and they get all that money, and they don't lose any vacation time, so they can take another vacation. So this is like, I don't like that. All of the rest of us that actually had to plan a vacation and take vacation, we work for companies that basically say, look, there's no vacation time. You can take any time, as much time off as you want. You know what that does? You don't build up any vacation time, and a company gets to pocket the cash, because if they had to actually have you, if they had to pay you for your vacation, then you wouldn't have the option to, you wouldn't get paid, right? You wouldn't get the ability to, you understand what I'm saying. You wouldn't be able to stock up or save your vacation. And for me, I'm like, the rest of us actually have to deal with jobs. We have to deal with, planning a vacation and planning when I'm not going to get paid and when I am going to get paid. And, a lot of people would actually stock up their vacation time, which is what a government contractor can do, or a government employee can do, where you can save your vacation. Sometimes they have an upper limit on that, but you could have a month, 2 months, 3 months of booked vacation that you never took. And then when you retire, when you get out, you burn that vacation, and it gives you a paycheck the entire time while you're out doing something else. And it's a smart move. If you had the option to do it, you'd do it. I would, it totally makes sense. But if you are a government employee and you understand the game, you play the game to the best advantage, right? And then to have this happen means they're kind of back on the same playing field the rest of us are on. They're not going to get that advantage anymore. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but somehow we'll figure that out. I'm not going to get into this Tim Walz thing because it doesn't make sense. He's quite, there's a healthy amount of disrespect in my mind right there, and I'm going to leave it at that. But so this, as a stockholder of Tesla, I'm happy to see this. As an owner of a Tesla, I'm disappointed because, I wish I had purchased the full price FSD when it was cheap. But I also know that I bought an older Tesla at a lower price, secondhand, and I knew eventually I'll probably get a newer one, which will have the later versions of hardware in it. So it didn't make sense to buy FSD at that time, and now to find out that they're going to raise the price, discontinue autopilot, autopilot is like 60% of full self-driving. I could get on the highway, put it in autopilot. It'll stay between the lanes. It'll brake. It'll stop for a traffic light. If you stop at the traffic light, it'll go. If you're in stop and go traffic, it'll stop and go with the traffic. You could just sit back without touching the wheel, without putting your foot on a brake, and the car would drive for you. And that was huge. It's just phenomenal. And now to know that they're going to cancel that because they're not going to give you the freebie, which is essentially autopilot, you have to buy FSD. FSD at $100 a month is great, but now they're going to raise that. That's going to kick me in the ass. But the one-time purchase used to be $8,000, and then it was $99 a month. Now I guess $99 a month. So they bumped it up $10,000. And by the way, everybody out there, you look at this price, $50,000, buy secondhand. I bought my Model Y for $25,000, a couple years old, no big deal. I didn't get any kind of a tax incentive. I just bought it, right? But I got it for the price of a fraction of this. And the beauty of it, if you ever look at the warranties on this car, the battery warranty is so long. It's like almost 8-10 years, something like that. So if anything goes wrong with the battery, they'll swap the battery out. You don't have to worry about it. The battery itself is rated for like 400,000 miles. So that means as long as there's no major fault, and there aren't that many, by the way, they don't have major faults that often. But if you drive it normally and you do what they say, which is at the moment for the battery I have, it's keep it between 20% and 80%. You try not to overcharge and you try not to run it down to zero. So if you do that and you keep that, I've had this car, it's a 2022, it's now 2026, and I'm still at like 98% capacity of what that battery can charge. So the longevity of that battery is way more than the FUD that's out there that tells you it's going to go bad. And then on top of that, the actual motors are rated for like 1 million miles. So the electric motors, if you think about how long a motor is rated in your gas car, a gas car probably has a 200,000 mile range before you end up having to do major retrofits, gaskets and boring things out or whatever, just because of the cylinders. There's an explosion inside of these cylinders every single time it cycles. And that has some impact over time on the quality of the cylinder. And you have to go in and bore that out. And that means you need new pistons. And the pistons have to be bigger and have to have a different ring so that the explosions can continue to happen. So at about 200,000 miles, you're in for a rebuild on most engines that is probably the same as the price of replacing an electric motor. Except you got to do that at 200, maybe 300, maybe 400,000 miles if your maintenance is kept up. So the whole perspective that my gas car, I can at least fix it and everything like that, well, it's really kind of a moot point when you look at, and by the way, pet peeve, it's moot point, M-O-O-T, not mute point. If you were one of those people that says the point is mute, mute means to silence. That's not what moot means. It's a moot point, as in we talked it to death. It's over. I know, side story here. If you go watch the second Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers, they have this thing with the trees who think very slowly, they move very slowly, and they take forever to make decisions because they have what's called an ent moot. And an ent moot is a meeting that they have, and the word moot goes back, that scene is Tolkien actually poking fun at government people taking forever to get to the point and forever to actually come to some decision, right? So the moot point is, let's not talk it to death. It's taking too long, just give it up, or we're going to talk forever, but not really make any decision. That's what moot means. And then mute is, I just silenced it. So that's sort of like the cancel culture, right? I'm going to mute you. Anyways, sorry. When you think about the perspective of having to replace a motor in a car like this, the motor rating, the warranty of 1 million miles means that motor, if the motor goes bad, you'll have to look at the warranty for the exact mileage, but it's really high. And to know that motor, there's two motors, one in the front and one in the back, that drives the wheels. The lower prices on these cars mean you get one in the back or one in the front and not two, right? And that's fine. And things like the Cyber Beast for the Cybertruck, the Cyber Beast has 3 engines. So it's basically 2 motors in the back, 1 in the front in the design to give it more power. So, how many motors you have obviously may have an impact on the price of replacing a motor in your car. But at maybe $8,000 to replace a motor, and maybe you have to do that twice. It could be as high as 16. But when you've got 1 million mile probable range of that before it needs any major service or replacing, that's pretty amazing. So anyways, you buy a secondhand Tesla, half the price of this. You're driving around in a car that can drive itself. I don't know how anybody in this day and age would actually buy a Tesla that was, or buy a vehicle that doesn't have some form of self-driving. And I could live with $100 a month if I get a discount on my insurance. So, that's pretty cool. And then down, I think if I scroll down, might actually see it, but I don't know. From yesterday, I don't know if any of you caught on to this, but Lemonade is an insurance company that does insurance. They use a lot of AI apparently, and they use integration with the car. So the Teslas, in order to get you full self-driving, you're integrated into their network, into their system. Lemonade is going to be able to monitor that directly and charge you based on specifically when you drive, how long you drive, how safely you drive, whether or not you use FSD, and give you really cheap insurance. So am I willing to pay an extra $10 a month, pay $100 a month for FSD, and pay a minimal insurance as a result? Heck yeah. I pay $1,500 a month for a car that's going on 4 years old now. Not $1,500, $1,500 a year for a car that I have the lowest possible coverage on, right? I basically only have, I have comprehensive because I want, if I bash into something, I want that paid for. But I have the deductibles way up so that I can get the lowest possible rate. So I'm going to have to do out of pocket like $2,000 or $1,000 for a major repair anyways, because of the configuration I have on my insurance. This means that I could, for $1,200, I'm going to probably get the comprehensive with everything with no deductible or really low deductible, and not have to deal with the nightmare of the joke that is typical insurance. So I guess I could pay $10 more. And I got to tell you, once you get used to something driving you around, you'll never go. You'll go back because you don't want to spend the money because you think that's too much money, until you start seeing these kind of synergies that make it cheaper. But wow, So anyways, this is one of the news sources, as I was saying, that I may start talking through, and you can see it took up my whole show here, and that's perfectly fine because from my perspective, I would definitely love to just make that part of what I'm doing on my stream. Now, the other one was this. I have the, over here in Grok, I have tasks, and I've got those right up here. And my Grok task goes out and does a daily news. And the daily news over here, what I'm doing is Scott pointed out a whole bunch of sources where he gets his news. And basically, the recent posts within the last 24 hours and who made posts. And this is the reason that I use Grok for this, the reason that I have this task is because the task allows me to find posts by people, right? There's a couple people on YouTube that are streaming everything that was said by so-and-so today. And they're making, bank on that, I guess, or at least people are subscribing because they care what's being said. So I've got this, all of the people that Scott pointed out as great sources of news delivering this information. And I'm going to go ahead and hop over to NotebookLM because I dumped that over here into NotebookLM. So we'll collapse that down a little bit and we'll move this over because over here, the chat, I asked for a summary of it. But we got Steve Cortez mentioning something about worker visas, but suggesting priority. I mean, this is just like silly. I'll pass on that, talking about that one. Howard Kurtz, nothing new. Jack Posobiec, frosty tensions or vigilance, possibly alluding to security or political climates, whatever. So he has a couple posts of something, maybe of interest. Jonathan Turley, criticizing Eric Swalwell on ICE agents unhireable in California making. So basically, we're now going to politicize ICE, and we're going to say that if you ever work for ICE, you can't have any other job in the state. So they're basically, this is 100% bad politics, if you ask me, because now we're going to do something. We're going to penalize somebody for taking a job to do a job, because hey, how many people take a job just because it pays, right? It's ridiculous that they're even considering. And I sure hope this dies in the legislature right away. if you are in California, you need to let your reps know, kill this, because that is just so ridiculous. It's like saying, think about what happened in the 70s. All of those troops, they were sent over to Vietnam. They came back and everybody spit on them. And, how many of them committed suicide, ended up homeless, ended up with really tough straits, and couldn't get jobs because they were military people in in Vietnam. Let me ask you a question. Is it right? I mean, that's totally, absolutely wrong. Why? Because they were drafted, half of them. They didn't even have a choice. They were conscripted off the street and sent to Vietnam. And then our government did that to them. And then some state level government came along and said, yeah, you're not going to get a job in this state because you were conscripted. Now, admittedly, ICE is not conscripted, but it's pretty sad. I mean, the fact that we have our federal government does something, and then we have state governments that just would spit on all of those poor people doing their job. And let's not say poor people, those people doing their job, right? And that, by the way, listen for words like that. You can tell that I sympathize with ICE because I said those poor people. When you actually hear people, news agencies, and they talk about those poor people or those bad people, and they stick the word into a sentence that builds this context around the person that they're talking about, what was it? New York Times, the disgraced Scott Adams, when he died, the disgraced cartoonist Scott Adams dies, right? What an asinine thing to do. It's just horrible. And, I find it funny because for those of you who know persuasion, and you've read any Cialdini and you know about this thing called persuasion, kind of getting in front of things. Scott used to call himself the disgrace. He'd do his coffee and he'd say, the disgraced comic book artist Scott Adams. I mean, he actually wrote that headline and used to talk about himself since the day he got canceled, using that as a perspective. So just really ironic. And anyways, so this is, I'm going to run out of time here because I'm trying to keep this to 1 hour. But there's the ability to pull this stuff together. Owen, the GDP was revised up 4.4%, higher with higher corporate profits. That's really nice. Magistrate judge rejected charges against Don Lemon. Not surprising, because his wife, the judge's wife, I guess, works for the Minnesota AG. Just bizarre. So that was one of the things Scott said. It's not, when you find out what the news is, you have to figure out who knows what. And I will tell you, this is a really interesting point. Right before I wrap it up here, I'm not going to go through any more of this news, but it is interesting to see how that all plays out. But when I was in the honor guard in Washington, D.C., 18 to 24, I had they would tell us, look, you're going to see a new law get passed, and you being downtown here in DC, you're going to know why that law got passed. They're going to make some kind of a law in a state that you maybe come from, and you're going to be here, your state's across the country, but you're stationed here, and you're here in DC, and you're going to know that the reason that they just made a law in the state of Minnesota or California or whatever about DWIs, and it's because some legislator's kid got a DWI and they're trying to loosen up the conviction around it so that their kid doesn't get screwed as bad, right? And that's the kind of things that happen. And so you find out that Don Lemon gets charged on something, and the judge who cancels it, his wife is on the legislature, something like that, or his wife is associated with it, whatever that was. I don't know what that story is, so I don't want to mischaracterize it. But so all of these things that happen in the news, it just blows. It'll blow your mind when the way that Scott pointed it out was, hey, if you see these things and you're wondering what's going on, What you need to know is what's behind the scenes, who is involved, what happened. And when you know that, then you know why things happen the way they do in our country. So here, this child detention hoax, I use the mind map to find it. And now, consistent with Scott Adams' 2 movies on one screen concept, Sobek dispute explicitly categorizes a story from the Washington Examiner claiming ICE was detaining children during operations targeting parents as a left-wing hoax. This fits a pattern of fake news, right? All right. The other side, same bullet, I guess. They accuse the former Representative Adam Kinzinger of lying. Sobek reinforces this by labeling the broader claim of child detention as lies. So, and then the analysis, the anti-ICE side is doing, so this didn't work out that well on the 2 movies with one screen concept, but maybe this one does. The mob frame, which is anti-ICE mobs, they did not invade the church. They were doing whatever they did. And then Don Lemon, a stark example of systemic bias. In the case of Don Lemon, while activists are arrested, magistrate rejects the charges against Don Lemon because ruling he was present for journalistic purposes. And yet, on the other side, the deep state behind it, the judge who rejected the charges against Lemon is the wife of Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. So going back to the entire purpose of what I'm trying to do here with this whole presentation, my live streams, is I study persuasion and influence. I did it as a salesperson for a long time, and I wanted to learn how to be a persuasive, influential person. I learned that from Scott. I learned that from Cialdini and from a lot of other persuasion masters that were out there. And now, at the end, after I'm not actively in that role, selling and pushing, what I'm really doing is saying, I know how I was able to, I could make something happen with people in a room in a discussion simply because I knew how to posture myself physically, visually, mentally, emotionally to influence the people around me. Now, when I look at the news and you can hear words that are used in a specific way that characterize a specific message that cause you to be in a situation where everything you hear is an influence. It's a persuasion tactic, a technique. And now we have a tool. One of the things Scott was trying to do was immunize us against that, right? He tried to teach us all of these techniques to spot hoaxes, spot fraud. And I'm saying there's an AI technique that you can use to help do that. Is it going to work every time? You just saw one that I don't know if it worked, right? I tried to do looking at the narrative as a hoax, trying to say, is this a hoax? Is it a two movies on one screen? One side sees one thing, the other side sees something else. But it did work here on the mob, Don Lemon, deep state, right? So the persuasion filter was the deep state filter. That there's some machinations behind the scenes that are why we got the story we got, right? And so that's, to me, that's what we want to be able to do, is have a set of techniques and filters, having something that gathers the news from trusted sources. The trusted sources, the people that we know actually might have something to say that and they're going to be maximally truthful. And that's, if you're going to think about who do you want to get your news from? You want to get your news from somebody that's on a channel where the channel is influenced by pharmaceuticals, car manufacturers, and oil companies, and all of these different organizations. Find positive news about Tesla on a CBS or an NBC or an ABC or even Fox, when the car companies behind all of those networks are all gas company cars, right? They sell gas cars. Why is that a big deal? Well, there's no gas company car out there that can profitably make an electric vehicle. They don't know how to do it. They just are incapable because they're built to build gas cars. And even the margins they get on gas cars are pretty slim. So when you look at Tesla can make 20 or 30% margin on their cars. And when you look at what they're doing with this whole FSD thing that we talked about a minute ago, down here where they're increasing the price of FSD by $10 a month. They're adding to their profitability right there. How much money are they going to bring in because of that? It's massive. And no gas car company can do that, right? So when you go to this and you try and think about who's going to have a positive spin on any of these stories, any company influenced by the gas companies, the oil companies, the car companies, the pharmaceuticals, they're not going to give you the straight news about anything you watch. So you need to know who are your sources of optimal truth. And when you have that, what you're looking for are these sources. I'm sorry, I'll go back down here to NotebookLM. You're looking for these sources that you can trust. And you need sources that you feel, even if they make mistakes, it's okay to make a mistake, but their intention is to tell you the truth. So you have something like Grok, which is intended to be optimized for maximal truth, combined with people that you know are optimized, like Cernovich, that are optimized for optimal truth. So you take their posts and their commentary on what the headlines are, and they become your filter to find these types of things. And then you have a tool like NotebookLM, where you can put a prompt inside the tool to say, now tell me, using Scott's filters, the Dilbert filter, the 2 movies on one screen, and a persuasion filters, and maybe something that has a large listing of all the persuasion techniques, show me the news in the context of those persuasion filters so that I can understand, am I seeing real news or am I seeing BS? And that's another chunk of, I think, what I'm going to do here on this channel. And I don't know if the stories I was telling you about my dad and all of these other things that I talked about at the beginning, they may be entertaining. If you enjoy that, great, I'll keep doing it. If you like this news part, I'll keep doing that. Or if I can teach, continue to teach and work with you on understanding the filters and saying, how do we get a good picture of what's real and what's not real? That's going to become so critical and I'm calling myself an AI mentor. I'm not saying I'm the world's most renowned person on AI, because I'm not. I don't know how to program AI. I'm not an AI architect or anything like that. But I do work, and I have been working for companies that are focused on data that comes out of AI for the last 7 years, about 7 years now. And one side is interpreting data, figuring out what data is good, bad, real, not real, things like that. Maybe tomorrow when I talk, I'll make a note of this. I'll talk about how I discovered that Tesla actually created a brand new communications protocol. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I was able to look at the data of some telemetry that was on a system that I was working on. And when I saw the telemetry, I'm like, something really weird's happening here. And it was like, we're seeing what looks like malicious, bad network connections, but it's not malicious. And then to top it off, it has characteristics of 2 different kinds of thing. So anyways, I'll tell that story another time. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed today. I'm going to stop the stream here, and I will talk to you tomorrow. And like I said, I hope